I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened. I need you to understand that I was one of them. I laughed at her too, not cruelly, not the way Doug Pasternak laughed at the neighborhood cookout, slapping his knee and calling her Doomsday Diane, loud enough for everyone on Maple Court to hear. Not like that, but I laughed in the quiet way husbands laugh when they love their wives but don't take them seriously. The way you chuckle and shake your head when she comes home with another case of canned beans. The way you roll your eyes at the water purification tablets appearing in the bathroom cabinet. I laughed like a man who believed the world was permanent. My name is Marcus Dunhill. I'm 41 years old. I was a regional sales manager for a medical device company. I drove a leased Audi. I coached my son's Little League team on Saturdays. I believed in the ordinary continuation of ordinary life. My wife, Claire, believed in the end of it. She started preparing 3 years before the outbreak. Not because of any single event. No documentary or podcast or conspiracy forum radicalized her. She told me it was a feeling. A quiet certainty that settled into her bones one Tuesday afternoon while she was folding laundry. She said she looked out the window at our street, at the Hendersons washing their car and the Okafor kids riding bikes, and she thought, this will end. And when it does, no one on the street will be ready. I told her she was stressed. I suggested therapy. She went to therapy and came back with a rotating food supply system she'd designed on graph paper. The garage became her domain. Shelving units appeared. Then water barrels, then medical kits organized by severity tier, then a laminated evacuation binder with roots color-coded by threat type. Our neighbors noticed. Of course they noticed. Doug Pasternak started calling her Doomsday Diane at the Memorial Day cookout in 2019. The name stuck like tar. Even people who liked Claire used it behind her back. Karen Whitfield, who borrowed our ladder twice a year and brought us Christmas cookies, admitted later she'd used it in a group text. Claire knew. She always knew. She never stopped preparing. By the time the first reports came out of Knoxville in Tennessee, confused news anchors describing a violent outbreak of unknown origin with shaky helicopter footage of people moving wrong, Claire had accumulated 14 months of food for 4 people, a water filtration system that could process river water, a ham radio with solar charging capability, full medical supplies, including antibiotics she'd stockpiled from veterinary sources, and a weapons cache I hadn't known about until she opened the false panel in the garage floor. 3 days. That's what separated everyone's laughter from everyone's silence. The Knoxville footage aired on a Wednesday. By Thursday morning, Nashville was dark. By Thursday night, the infection had crossed into Kentucky and Virginia simultaneously. By Friday, the CDC stopped holding press conferences. By Saturday morning, I woke to the sound of Claire moving through our house with a calm I will never forget. Methodically sealing windows with pre-cut plywood she'd stored in the crawl space. Our son, Ethan, was 14. He stood in the hallway in his pajamas watching his mother drill screws into boards she'd measured and labeled months ago. Each piece had a window name written on it in permanent marker. Kitchen left, kitchen right, living main. She'd practiced this, and I hadn't even noticed. I stood behind Ethan, and I felt something I'd never felt before in my own home. I felt like a guest, like someone who'd wandered into a place where competent people did competent things, and my role was to stand aside and not interfere. Claire looked at me over her shoulder. No triumph in her eyes, no vindication, just focus. Just a woman doing what she'd trained herself to do while her husband had been laughing softly and shaking his head for 3 years. "Get the emergency binder from the top shelf in the garage," she said. "The red one. Section 4 covers the first 72 hours. I went to get it. I didn't laugh. The binder was 3 inches thick with laminated pages separated by color-coded tabs. I carried it to the kitchen table and opened it while Claire finished the downstairs windows. Ethan helped her without being asked, holding boards in place while she drove screws with the cordless drill. They moved like they'd rehearsed this. I realized, with a cold, sinking feeling, that they probably had. Section 4 was titled Shelter in Place, Urban Residential, First 72 Hours. The detail was staggering. Hourly protocols for the first day, checklists for structural reinforcement, a communication schedule for monitoring AM/FM and ham frequencies, a decision tree for determining when to stay versus when to evacuate, with specific trigger conditions for each branch. My phone buzzed. A text from my brother, Paul, in Indianapolis. "You watching this? What the hell is happening in Tennessee?" I typed back, "Staying put. Claire's got us covered." He responded, "Covered how?" I didn't know how to explain it. I didn't know how to tell my brother that my wife had built a survival infrastructure while I'd been watching football and closing quarterly sales targets. So I just typed, "She prepared. We're okay." The television was still working that Saturday morning. We kept it on with the volume low. Every channel showed the same thing. Aerial footage of highways clogged with cars, military vehicles moving in columns, press conferences where officials used words like containment and localized, while their eyes said something different entirely. Claire came into the kitchen at 9:47 a.m. I remember the exact time because she checked her watch, a chunky digital Casio she'd started wearing 6 months ago, and said, "We're ahead of schedule." Ahead of schedule. As if the collapse of civilization had a timeline and she'd already mapped it. "How long do we stay?" I asked. "The binder says 72 hours minimum before reassessment, but I've modeled this differently." She sat across from me at the table. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was even. "Marcus, what's happening out there is going to reach us by tonight, maybe sooner. The infection vector is faster than anything the models predicted." "How do you know?" "Because Knoxville went dark in 6 hours. Nashville lasted 8. The acceleration between them suggests a doubling pattern." She pointed to a page in the binder I hadn't reached yet, a hand-drawn graph showing projected spread rates based on population density. Our suburbs sat in a yellow zone, 24 to 36 hours from a metro breach point. "We're 30 miles from Columbus," she said. "If Columbus falls by tonight, we'll see infected by morning." I stared at her. This woman I'd slept beside for 16 years. This woman whose meal prep Sundays I'd teased. Whose bulk purchases of batteries I'd questioned. Who I'd accused of anxiety spiraling when she'd suggested Ethan learn basic wound care. "What do you need me to do?" I said. Something shifted in her face. A softening. Relief, maybe, or gratitude that I was finally asking instead of dismissing. "Fill every bathtub and sink. We'll lose water pressure within 48 hours of grid failure. Then I need you to bring up the totes from the basement, the ones marked Phase 1. And talk to Ethan. He knows the plan, but he's going to need you to be steady." "He knows the plan?" "I taught him, over the last year." She held my gaze. "I tried to include you, Marcus, multiple times." She was right. She'd tried. I declined. I'd said things like, "That's your project, and I trust your judgment," without actually trusting her judgment at all. I'd been dismissing her by delegating, honoring her obsession by ignoring it. I filled the bathtubs, both of them, plus the utility sink in the basement. The water pressure was still strong at 10 a.m. By 3 p.m., it had weakened noticeably. By 8 p.m., it was a trickle. Claire had been right about that too. She was right about everything. And the cost of everyone else being wrong was about to arrive at our door. The first infected person I saw was Gerald Whitfield, Karen's husband, the man who'd fixed our garbage disposal last spring and refused payment, saying neighbors help neighbors. It was Sunday morning, just after dawn. I was checking the plywood seals on the front windows. Claire had shown me how to inspect for gaps where light leaked through. When I heard movement on the street, not walking, something between walking and falling, a stuttered locomotion that sounded like a man trying to run on broken legs. I pressed my eye to a gap between two boards. The street was gray in the early light. The Hendersons' house across the way had its front door wide open, which was wrong. Their porch light still burned, a small, ordinary thing that felt obscene. Gerald came from the left. He was wearing the same khaki pants and polo shirt he'd worn to Saturday's canceled block meeting, the one we'd all decided to skip because of the news. His left arm hung at an angle that arms don't hang. His face was turned away from me, but his movement told me everything Claire's research had predicted. Jerking, compulsive, driven by something that had replaced the man who'd once debated grilling techniques with me for 45 minutes. He stopped in the middle of the road, his head turned toward our house. I stepped back from the gap, even though I knew he couldn't see me. My heart was slamming so hard, I could feel it in my throat. Claire's hand touched my shoulder. She'd appeared behind me without sound. "Don't react," she whispered. "They're attracted to noise and movement. The boards will hold. He can't know we're here." Gerald stood in the road for what felt like an hour, but was probably 3 minutes. Then he moved on. That awful lurching gait carrying him east toward the Pasternak house. I heard Doug's dog start barking, a frantic, terrified sound. And then the barking stopped in a way that made my stomach clench. I looked at Claire. The Whitfields, Karen, their kids. "I don't know," she said. Her voice was controlled, but I could see the cost of that control in the tightness around her eyes. I knocked on their door Thursday night. I told Karen what was coming. I offered supplies. What did she say? She said I was overreacting. She said Gerald thought I needed to relax. Claire paused. She used the name, Doomsday Diane. I closed my eyes. "We can't help them now," Claire continued. "If they're alive and uninfected, they'll need to come to us. But we can't go out there." Ethan was in the upstairs hallway when I turned around. He'd seen nothing, but he'd heard everything. His face was pale but composed in a way that disturbed me. A 14-year-old shouldn't look that prepared for horror. "Was that Mr. Whitfield?" he asked. "Yes." "Is he infected?" I nodded. Ethan processed this with a single slow blink, then said, "Mom, should I activate the upstairs monitoring rotation?" Claire said yes. He disappeared into his room and returned with binoculars and a notebook. He took position at the small, uncovered window at the end of the hall, the one Claire had deliberately left as an observation point with a blackout curtain that could be drawn across in seconds. My son was running surveillance protocols. My wife was managing our survival. And I was standing in my own house, wondering what my role was in this family's continued existence. The answer came 20 minutes later, when the power went out. Not a flicker in recovery, a hard, final cessation. The refrigerator stopped humming. The digital clocks died. The background electrical murmur that you never notice until it vanishes disappeared, leaving a silence so complete it felt pressurized. Claire was already moving. "Generator stays off for now," Noise discipline. We go to battery and solar from this point. She'd staged battery-powered LED lanterns throughout the house weeks ago. I'd barely registered them appearing. Now, they were the only light we had. Everything she'd done while I wasn't watching was now the architecture of our survival. By Sunday afternoon, Maple Court was unrecognizable. Not visually, the houses still stood, the lawns still existed, the mailboxes still lined the curb in their orderly row. But the absence of human life transformed everything familiar into something alien. No cars moved, no doors opened, no children played. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was predatory. It was the silence of a place where living people had been, and now something else remained. Ethan's observation log. He kept it in the notebook Claire had given him, writing in small, precise letters, showed 6 infected individuals crossing our street between dawn and 3 p.m. Gerald Whitfield. 2 people he didn't recognize, probably from Oakdale Drive behind us. A woman in a hospital gown who moved faster than the others. A teenager in a high school leather jacket. And Mrs. Henderson, who was 67 years old and had given Ethan candy on Halloween for 10 years straight. Claire studied the log with clinical focus. They're moving east to west mostly, following the road, not searching houses yet, just traveling. That'll change. When? I asked. When they run out of visible prey on the streets. When the easy targets are gone, they'll start trying doors. The ham radio crackled intermittently in the corner of the living room. Claire had been monitoring 3 frequencies. Most were static. One carried a loop recording from FEMA that repeated every 4 minutes. Shelter in place, help is coming. Do not approach infected individuals. The recording had been running since Saturday. No live voice had interrupted it. At 4:15 p.m., a different voice broke through on a local frequency. Male, scared, breathing hard. This is Danny Cho. I'm on Birchwood Lane. Anyone copy? Anyone alive on this frequency? Claire picked up the handset. Danny, this is Claire Dunhill on Maple Court. We copy. Are you safe? Claire? A pause. Doomsday Diane? I watched her jaw tighten, then release. Yes, Danny. Are you safe? I'm in my attic. My wife, Sarah, she's here too. We've been up here since last night. There are 3 of them in our house. They came through the back door. We can hear them downstairs. His voice cracked. We don't have food up here. We don't have water. We have maybe 6 hours before Sarah's insulin runs out. Claire looked at me. I could read the calculation in her eyes. Birchwood Lane was 3 streets away. 8-minute walk under normal conditions. In the current environment, with infected roaming, it was a journey measured in risk rather than distance. Danny, listen to me, Claire said. Do you have attic access to your roof? There's a vent panel I could probably kick out. Can you get to your roof and then to an adjacent roof, away from your house? Maybe, I don't know. Sarah can't climb well. Her hands shake when her sugar drops. Claire covered the handset and looked at me. If we bring them here, that's 2 more people consuming resources. Sarah needs insulin we don't have enough of to supply long term. But if we leave them, they die tonight. We get them, I said. It wasn't even a question. Marcus, I need you to understand what I'm about to say without flinching. She held my gaze. We can guide them here by radio. But if they bring infected to our door, if the noise of their transit draws attention to this house, everything I built could collapse in minutes. Then we guide them carefully. She studied me for 3 seconds. Then she keyed the handset. Danny, I'm going to talk you through a route. You'll move after dark. The infected seem more reactive to visual stimulus in daylight based on what we've observed. Do exactly what I say when I say it. Both of you. No improvising. Okay, Danny said. Okay, Claire. Thank you. God, thank you. She didn't say you're welcome. She opened her binder to the local street map she'd hand-annotated with sight lines, fence heights, and cover positions. She'd mapped escape routes for the whole neighborhood, for the neighbors who'd laughed at her. We waited for dark. Claire spent the intervening hours preparing. She designated the guest bedroom for Danny and Sarah, pre-staging water, protein bars, and a sleeping bag. She checked our insulin supply. She'd stocked 3 emergency pens as part of her medical kit, enough for Sarah for perhaps 5 days, if carefully rationed. She updated her resource consumption projections on a spreadsheet she maintained by hand in a hardcover journal. I watched her work. I'd spent 16 years watching this woman and not seeing her, not seeing the intelligence running beneath what I'd dismissed as anxiety, not recognizing preparation as a form of love so practical it looked like paranoia. Why did you stock insulin? I asked. Because I paid attention to our neighbors, she said without looking up. Sarah's been diabetic since 2017. The Henderson's son has severe asthma. I have inhalers for him too. Doug Pasternak takes blood pressure medication. I stocked what I could for anyone who might end up here. Doug called you? I know what he called me. She closed the journal. It doesn't matter now. None of it matters now. At 9 p.m., the street was fully dark. No street lights, no porch lights, no glow from windows anywhere on Maple Court. The moon was a thin crescent. Claire had checked the lunar calendar weeks ago and marked this window as optimal for low visibility movement. She keyed the radio. Danny, status. We're ready. Sarah's shaking, but she's ready. We got onto the Miller's roof next door. We're behind their chimney. Good. Climb down using their back deck. There's a trellis on the north side that'll hold your weight. Drop into their yard. The fence between their yard and the Cohens has a loose board. 3rd from the left gatepost. Push through there. How do you know that? I walked the neighborhood. I mapped it. Keep moving. Radio silence unless emergency. Keep the volume at minimum. I'll guide you at each checkpoint. For the next 47 minutes, Claire directed Danny and Sarah through a route that wound through 7 backyards, along a drainage ditch, and through a gap in the wooden fence that bordered our property on the south side. She'd prepared this specific approach. There was a note in her binder labeled Southern Ingress Route, Low Visibility Extraction Path. She'd planned for rescuing neighbors. She'd planned for the exact scenario of guiding frightened people to safety through a compromised neighborhood. While they called her names, she was designing their salvation. Ethan maintained his post upstairs, watching through the binoculars for movement. Twice he whispered down the stairs that infected were visible. Once on the road in front, once cutting through the Okafor yard. And Claire paused Danny's movement until the all clear. At 9:52 p.m., I opened the back door, and Danny Cho came through it carrying his wife on his back. Sarah was barely conscious. Her blood sugar had crashed. Claire already had a glucose tablet ready. She pressed it between Sarah's lips while Danny lowered her onto the couch we'd moved to the back room. Danny looked at Claire with an expression I recognized because I'd worn it myself 36 hours ago. The expression of someone realizing they'd been profoundly wrong about another person. "Claire, I'm sorry," he said. His voice was ragged. "I'm sorry for everything we said." "Sit down," Claire told him. "Drink water, eat something. We'll talk about assignments tomorrow." Assignments. Everyone contributes. Everyone works. That's how this functions. She was already checking Sarah's pulse, her fingers steady on the woman's wrist. You were an electrician before you went into sales, right? How did you? I pay attention, Danny. I've always paid attention. He sat down. He drank the water she gave him. He didn't say anything else for a long time. I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and back room, watching my wife save a woman's life with supplies she'd been mocked for purchasing. The darkness pressed against our boarded windows. Somewhere outside, Gerald Whitfield's body walked roads he'd once driven. The world had changed. Claire had not. She'd always been ready. We'd just been too proud to see it. Monday morning, day 4 of the new world. I woke at 5 a.m. to the sound of Claire's voice on the ham radio, speaking low and steady. I found her in the living room with the radio's amber display glowing in the dark, her notebook open, pen moving. Copy that, Westbrook Station. Understood. Dunhill out. She looked up. Columbus fell completely overnight. Military pulled back to a perimeter at Route 33. They're not coming into the suburbs. We're on our own. I sat beside her. The house was still dark, still quiet. Danny and Sarah slept in the guest room. Ethan was due for his observation shift at 6. How long? I asked. It was the only question that mattered. The military perimeter might hold for weeks, might collapse tomorrow. Either way, no one is mounting rescue operations for residential neighborhoods. We're triaged out. She set down her pen. I heard 12 other survivors on local frequencies last night. 7 households within a mile radius. Some have food for a few days. Most have nothing. Are you thinking about bringing them here? I'm thinking about what happens when desperate people find out we have supplies and they don't. Her voice was quiet, but I heard the weight beneath it. If we help everyone who calls, we run out in 3 weeks instead of 14 months. If we help no one, we become a target when they get desperate enough to take. So what do? We build a network, not a charity, a network. People contribute skills, labor, security. In exchange, we share resources strategically. We become the center node, not because we're generous, but because we're necessary. This was the Claire that scared me. Not the Claire with the binder and the canned goods. That was endearing, manageable, something I could condescend about. This Claire was a strategist, a leader thinking 3 moves ahead, while the rest of us were still processing move 1. You've planned for this specifically, I said. Section 7 of the binder, Community Integration Protocol. I almost laughed, not dismissively. I'd retired that kind of laughter forever. But out of sheer, overwhelming recognition of how completely my wife had outthought every scenario I'd refused to consider. At 6 a.m., Ethan took his shift. At 7, Sarah woke, stabilized by the insulin and glucose Claire had administered overnight. Danny was already up, examining our electrical setup with professional attention. Your solar panel array is good, he told Claire. But the wiring to the battery bank has a bottleneck at the junction box. I can increase your charging efficiency by 30% if you have 14-gauge wire. Bin 7 in the garage, Claire said. 3rd shelf, left side, labeled. Danny went to get it. I watched him go and felt something crystallize in my chest, Claire's vision working in real time. People arriving, assessing, contributing. A system emerging from preparation meeting opportunity. At 8 a.m., the radio brought a voice I didn't want to hear. Doug Pasternak. Loud, panicked, unmistakable. Anyone out there? This is Doug on Maple Court. We're trapped. Oh God, there's a bunch of them in our backyard, and Monica's hurt. She tried to climb the fence, and please, anyone. Claire's hand rested on the radio. She didn't pick it up immediately. Her eyes found mine, and I saw the question there. Not whether to help, but how to navigate helping a man who'd spent 3 years making her a punchline. "Claire," I said. "I know." She picked up the handset. "Doug, this is Claire Dunhill. Describe your situation." A static-filled pause, then, "Claire. Oh, thank God. Thank God. Listen, Monica's bleeding bad. Her leg. And there's at least 4 of them in the backyard. We're in the upstairs bedroom. My kids are here, Claire." 3 children, 8, 11, and 13. Claire's expression didn't change, but her hand moved to the binder, flipping to the extraction routes. Doug Pasternak lived 4 houses east of us. The same man who'd christened her with a mocking name. His children hadn't done that. "Stand by, Doug," she said. "I'm building your route now." Getting the Pasternaks out was harder than the Cho extraction. Doug's house was closer, but the infected concentration around it was higher. Ethan counted 7 in the immediate vicinity from his observation post. Claire spent 90 minutes on the radio, coaching Doug through a sequence that required him to lower his 3 children from a second-story window using knotted bed sheets, then guide them across adjacent rooftops to a drop point where I would be waiting. That was the first time Claire sent me outside. She handed me a crowbar, a flashlight taped with red film to reduce visibility, and a hand-drawn map of the exact route I'd take through our backyard, over the Okafor fence, and to the rendezvous point. "Stay low. Move only when I radio you the all clear. If you encounter an infected individual, do not engage. Retreat to the house. Your job is to receive them at the drop point, nothing else." I took the crowbar. My hands weren't steady. "And if something goes wrong?" "Then you come back, no matter what. You come back." She said it without emotion, but I understood what she meant. If Doug and his family were compromised, I was not to die trying to save them. I was to return to our fortified house, to our son, to her. Survival arithmetic. Cold and correct. I moved through the darkness of our backyard like a man learning to walk again. Every sound was amplified. My breathing, the grass under my shoes, the distant sound of something moving 2 streets over that I refused to identify. I cleared the Okafor fence using the step stool Claire had positioned there days ago, landed in their empty yard, and crouched behind their shed. "Clear," Claire's voice whispered in the 2-way radio clipped to my belt. "Move to point 2. I crossed to the Hendersons' property. Their back door was open, a dark rectangle that exhaled cold air. I didn't look inside. I moved past it to the low section of fence that connected to the Pasternak property's eastern boundary. "Hold," Claire said. I froze. 20 seconds of silence. Then the sound of shuffling, that distinctive broken gate sound, passing somewhere ahead of me, moving away. "Clear, move." At the drop point, a flat section of the Miller's garage roof accessible from ground level via their deck. I waited. 3 minutes later, a small face appeared over the roof edge. Doug's youngest, Lily, 8 years old, eyes enormous in the darkness. "Mr. Dunhill?" she whispered. "I'm here, Lily. I've got you." I caught her as she lowered herself down. Then Trevor, 11. Then Jake, 13, and trying to be brave. His jaw clenched so hard, I could see the muscles working. Then Monica, her left leg wrapped in a blood-soaked towel, lowering herself with a muffled cry of pain. Doug came last, heavier, clumsier, his breath ragged with fear. "Doug," I whispered. "Follow me. No talking. Hold Monica's hand. Kids, stay between us." We moved back along my route. Claire guided us through 2 pauses when infected crossed nearby. Monica limped badly, The gash on her leg was deep, but she made no sound. Mothers in crisis find reserves that defy physiology. When we reached our back door, Claire had it open. She pulled Monica inside first, already cutting away the towel to assess the wound. Danny was there with the medical kit open. The children were wrapped in blankets by Sarah, who moved slowly but purposefully. Doug Pasternak stood in my kitchen, surrounded by survival infrastructure his neighbor had built while he invented nicknames for her. His face was gray, not from the journey, from recognition, from the collision between who he'd said Claire was and who she actually turned out to be. "Claire," he started. "Sit down, Doug," she said, not looking up from Monica's leg. "Eat something. Rest. We'll talk about your work assignments in the morning." Same words she'd given Danny. No recrimination, no lecture, just inclusion conditional on contribution. The machine grew larger by one family. By Tuesday, day 5, our house held 11 people. The Dunhills, the Chos, and the Pasternaks. Claire ran the operation with the binder as her Bible, adapting protocols for the increased population. She divided responsibilities immediately. Danny handled electrical systems and battery maintenance. Doug was assigned structural reinforcement and security modification. His construction background made him ideal despite his other failings. Sarah, recovering but alert, managed inventory and rationing calculations. Monica, her legs stitched by Claire with supplies from the surgical kit, oversaw the children's schedule and education. I was assigned external operations, scouting, resource recovery, the outside man. The role terrified me. But Claire was right. She was always right. That someone needed to interface with the exterior environment. And that person needed to be expendable enough that losing them wouldn't collapse the system. She didn't say expendable. She said mobile. But I understood. If I died outside these walls, the community survived. If Claire died, it didn't. I accepted this hierarchy because it was true. Not because I was brave, but because I finally understood my position in the constellation my wife had built. That Tuesday morning, Claire held what she called a council. All adults gathered in the living room, while the Pasternak children played quietly upstairs under Ethan's supervision. "Here's our situation," she said, standing before us with her journal open. "We have food for 11 people for approximately 6 weeks at current ration levels. Water is stable with filtration but dependent on the rain collection system Danny improved yesterday. We have medical supplies for moderate injuries and common illnesses for roughly 3 months. We have power for essential functions, radio, lighting, charging, indefinitely via solar." 6 weeks of food, Doug repeated. "Then what?" "Then we either resupply or we starve. Which is why starting this week, Marcus and I are planning resource acquisition runs to abandoned properties." "Looting," Doug said. "Survival," Claire corrected without defensiveness. Every house on this street and the surrounding blocks contained food when their occupants fled or died. That food is degrading. The longer we wait, the less viable it becomes. We go systematically, efficiently, and safely. Danny raised his hand like a schoolchild, then lowered it, embarrassed. "What about the infected? There are more every day. Ethan's counts show." "Increasing density, yes." Claire flipped a page in her journal. "But patterns are emerging. They cluster around noise sources. They're less active in rain. They seem to enter a dormant state in enclosed spaces during midday heat. These windows give us operational opportunities." She'd been studying them. While we cowered behind boarded windows, she'd been gathering behavioral data from Ethan's observations, cataloging patterns, identifying exploitable weaknesses. Not to fight them, to avoid them. "Here's what I need everyone to understand," Claire continued, her voice steady but carrying a new edge I hadn't heard before. "This isn't temporary. No one is coming. The military perimeter is containment, not rescue. They've written off everything inside the zone. We are a permanent community now. Act accordingly." Silence. Doug's face worked through several expressions: denial, anger, grief, before settling on something like grim acceptance. Sarah reached for Danny's hand. Monica stared at the floor. I watched them absorb what Claire had known for years. The world could end. The world did end. And the only people who would survive were those who stopped waiting for rescue and started building. "Assignments continue as designated," Claire said. "Marcus, I need you ready for the first supply run tomorrow at noon. Danny, I need the garage bay converted into a decontamination zone by tonight. We can't bring outside material in without protocol. Doug, the second-floor windows need reinforcement bars. Let's move." Everyone moved. No one argued. The structure Claire provided wasn't oppressive. It was oxygen. In the absence of every external system they depended on, she offered them a new system: purpose, roles, survival through organization. I caught her eye as the group dispersed. She gave me a slight nod. Not triumph, acknowledgement. We were building something together now. Late, but together. The first supply run nearly killed me. Claire planned it meticulously. The Henderson house first, closest and most familiar. She'd mapped the approach, identified entry points, estimated the house's food stores based on her knowledge of the family's shopping habits. I went at noon on Wednesday, when Ethan's observation data suggested lowest infected activity. I went alone. Claire insisted. More than one person increased noise signature and reduced maneuverability. I carried a backpack, the crowbar, and a two-way radio set to minimum volume. The Henderson house was 60 feet from our back fence. I covered it in 12 seconds, crouching low, moving through the gap in the hedgerow Claire had identified. Their back door was unlocked, hanging slightly open in fact, which should have warned me. Inside was dark. The smell hit immediately. Food rotting in a powerless refrigerator, something organic and terrible beneath that, something I refused to identify. I moved to the kitchen. Pantry first. Claire's priority list was specific. Canned goods, dry pasta, rice, anything sealed and shelf-stable. The pantry was half full. I loaded my pack systematically. Heaviest items at the bottom, exactly as Claire had instructed. 12 cans of vegetables, 4 boxes of pasta, a sealed bag of rice, 2 jars of peanut butter. I was reaching for a container of oatmeal when I heard it. Breathing, not mine. Wet, labored breathing from the hallway behind me. I turned slowly. Mrs. Henderson stood in the kitchen doorway, or what had been Mrs. Henderson. She was wearing the same floral housecoat she'd always worn on weekend mornings. Her eyes tracked me with that glazed, mechanical focus I'd seen from behind our boards, but never up close. Never 3 feet away. She didn't lunge. She stood there, breathing that awful wet sound, her head tilting slowly to one side like she was trying to remember something. Trying to access whatever remained of the person she'd been. I didn't move. Claire's instructions, no sudden motion, no noise. They respond to stimulus, not presence. If you're still and quiet, you may register as furniture. As nothing. The longest 13 seconds of my life passed. Mrs. Henderson's head tilted to the other side. Then she turned, not toward me, away, and shuffled down the hallway toward the living room. The sound of her slippers on hardwood fading as she moved deeper into her own dead home. I exhaled through my nose. Silent, controlled. Then I finished loading my pack, left through the back door, and crossed to our fence in 8 seconds. When I came through our decontamination zone, the garage bay Danny had rigged with plastic sheeting and a bucket of diluted bleach, my hands started shaking, not during, after. The fear had waited politely for safety before demanding acknowledgement. Claire met me in the kitchen. She took the backpack, inventoried its contents against her expected yield, and marked the Henderson house on her map with a yellow circle indicating partial depletion. "You're shaking," she observed. "Mrs. Henderson was inside." Her pen stopped. "Infected?" "Yes, she was. Claire, she was right there, 3 feet. Claire set down the pen and did something she hadn't done since this started. She put her arms around me, held me against her while my body processed the terror retroactively. She smelled like the house, like canned food and lamp oil and survival. But beneath that, like herself, like the woman I'd married, the woman I'd underestimated for 16 years, who was now the only reason I was still breathing. "You did well," she said. "You followed protocol. You came back." "I came back." She pulled away. "Professional again. Leader again. Same run tomorrow, the Okafor house. Based on their family size, I estimate higher yield." I nodded. I'd go again tomorrow, and the day after, because this was my role in the system she'd built. The expendable man who went outside so the indispensable woman could continue engineering survival from within. I was okay with that. I'd spent years being wrong about everything important. Being right about my own role, understanding it clearly, finally, was almost a relief. The trouble started on day 12. Not from outside, the external threats were constant but manageable, cataloged in Ethan's growing observation ledgers. The trouble came from within, as Claire had predicted it would. Section 9 of her binder, which I'd finally read cover to cover, contained a subsection titled Group Psychology, Breakdown Timeline. She'd estimated internal conflict would emerge between days 10 and 14. Doug started it. He'd been compliant for the first week, grateful even. He reinforced windows, installed the interior bar locks Claire designed, built a secondary escape hatch through the attic that connected to the roof. Good work. Essential work. But Doug Pasternak was a man accustomed to being large in every room he occupied. Large in voice, in presence, in authority. And the longer he spent in Claire's house, under Claire's rules, following Claire's orders, the more that largeness chafed against its confinement. It began at the evening meal. Rations were modest, Claire maintained strict caloric calculations, and Doug had been picking at his portion of rice and canned chicken with visible frustration for 3 nights running. "My kids are hungry," he said. Not loudly. That was what made it dangerous. Claire looked up from her journal. "Everyone is on the same ration schedule, Doug. Adults receive 1,400 calories. Children receive 1,200. It's calculated for sustainability." Calculated. He pushed his plate away. "My 13-year-old son is a growing boy. He needs more than 1,200 calories. If Jake eats more, someone else eats less. The math doesn't accommodate exceptions." Doug leaned back in his chair. The room was quiet. Danny and Sarah at one end of the table, Monica beside her children, Ethan next to me. Everyone felt the pressure change. "See, here's what I'm thinking," Doug said. His voice taking on that folksy, reasonable tone he'd used at neighborhood meetings when he was about to be unreasonable. "We've got 4 adults who can run supply missions. We're only sending 1. If we sent more people out, more often, we'd bring back more food, and nobody's kids would go hungry. The protocol exists to minimize risk and noise signature, Claire said. Multiple runners increase detection probability exponentially. Your protocol, Doug said. Your rules, your house. Everything according to Claire. He spread his hands. I'm just asking. When did we vote on this? When did we agree that one person makes every decision? The silence that followed was physical. I felt it press against my eardrums. Claire set down her pen. You're right, Doug. You didn't vote. You showed up at my door with your bleeding wife and terrified children in the middle of the night, and I let you in. I fed you. I treated Monica's wound. I kept your family alive. Her voice didn't rise. It lowered. You want democracy? Fine, let's vote. Who here wants to increase supply run frequency and personnel against my assessment of the threat environment? Nobody raised their hand, not even Doug. Because everyone in that room knew, even Doug knew, that Claire's assessments had been flawless. Every prediction confirmed, every preparation vindicated. Voting against her wasn't disagreement. It was suicide. That's what I thought, Claire said. She returned to her journal. Doug stood, his chair scraping against the floor. This isn't right, he said. One person shouldn't have this much control. It isn't right. He left the room. Monica followed, herding their children ahead of her with apologetic eyes. Later, in our bedroom, the only private space left to us, and even that privacy was thin, Claire sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and said, He's going to be a problem. He's scared, I said. His kids are hungry. He feels powerless. He felt powerless before this, she said. Men like Doug don't resist authority because they want freedom. They resist because they want to be the authority. She lay back. I can manage him, but I need you to watch him. If he starts talking to others separately, building alliances, I need to know. I said I would. I meant it. I watched my wife stare at the ceiling in the darkness, carrying 11 lives on a frame that never asked for recognition. Only compliance. The supply runs continued daily. By day 15, I'd cleared 9 houses within our operational radius. Each one told a story. Some had been abandoned methodically, families packing cars and fleeing early. Others told darker stories. Blood on walls, doors torn from hinges, a child's shoe on a staircase leading nowhere. I stopped registering these details emotionally. Claire had warned me about this too. Section 12 of the binder, Psychological Self-Preservation in Sustained Crisis. Compartmentalization isn't numbness, she'd written. It's architecture. You build rooms in your mind, and you close doors. I was closing a lot of doors. On day 16, something changed in the threat environment. Ethan's observation logs showed a dramatic increase, from 6 to 8 daily sightings to 23 in a single 12-hour period. The infected were concentrating, moving inward from the arterial roads into the residential clusters. Claire studied the data and went quiet for an hour, which scared me more than anything else could have. They're depleting the available population on the main corridors, she finally said. They're following stimulus gradients inward. Within a week, they'll be dense enough in our immediate area that external operations become unsustainable. What does that mean? It means we have 5 days, maybe 6, to acquire everything we're going to acquire. After that, the doors close. We sustain on what we have. I doubled my runs. Morning and afternoon, Claire watching my routes from the observation post, guiding me around concentrations that Ethan tracked in real time. My backpack came home full each trip. Food, medicine, tools, clothing, batteries. books for the children. Each hall was inventoried, cataloged, integrated into Claire's supply calculations. Doug volunteered to accompany me on day 17. Claire considered it for longer than I expected before declining. "If you die out there, your children lose their father," she told him. "If Marcus dies, your son loses his father," Doug countered. "Marcus has been trained on the protocols. He's 16 runs experienced. You have no outside experience." "Then train me." Claire paused, something recalculated behind her eyes. "Fine, tomorrow. Marcus leads, you observe. 1 run. You follow his instructions without deviation." Doug agreed. I wasn't comfortable with it, but I understood Claire's reasoning. Give him something, a controlled something, before he took something uncontrolled. The run went badly. Not catastrophically, no one died. But Doug couldn't move quietly. He was too large, too clumsy, too accustomed to occupying space without consideration. Every step he took sounded like an announcement. When we entered the Morrison house at the end of the block, he immediately began opening cabinets with force rather than finesse, each door closing with a sound that made my teeth ache. "Quiet," I hissed. "I am being quiet," he whispered back, indignant. Then came the thud from upstairs, something responding to the noise, something that had been dormant in an enclosed space, just as Claire had documented, now activated by stimulus. "Out," I said. "Now." We left with half a pack of supplies instead of a full one. As we crossed back through the Henderson hedge, I heard the Morrison front door bang open behind us. Whatever we'd woken was now outside, adding to the local population, making tomorrow harder because today, Doug couldn't close a cabinet without slamming it. Back in decontamination, Claire assessed the situation wordlessly. She looked at the half-full pack, looked at Doug, looked at me. "Doug, you're back on interior assignment," she said. His jaw worked. 1 run, 1 mistake, and I'm done. 1 mistake outside gets people killed. You're more valuable inside. More valuable or more controlled? Claire didn't answer. She turned away to inventory the supplies. Doug stood in the garage with bleach dripping from his boots and resentment building behind his eyes like pressure in a sealed container. I should have told Claire what I saw in his face that night. I should have warned her that containment was failing. I was too tired, too focused on my own compartmentalization, my own closed doors. That was my mistake. One of many, day 19. The density around our block reached a threshold that made outside operations impossible. Ethan counted 41 infected visible from our observation post in a single morning. They moved through the streets in loose clusters now, not individually. Some stood motionless for hours, then erupted into that horrifying sprint when stimulus occurred. A bird, a falling branch, a gust of wind catching a trash can lid. The doors closed. We were sealed inside with what we had. Claire announced the transition at the morning council. External operations are suspended indefinitely. We have enough food for approximately 10 weeks at current ration levels. Water remains stable. Our priority now shifts to fortification, monitoring, and psychological sustainment. 10 weeks, Danny said. And then? In 10 weeks, the infected population in our area may have migrated or deteriorated. Reports from other ham operators suggest they have a functional lifespan. Their bodies break down. We may see density decrease over time. May, Doug said. May, Claire confirmed. I don't have certainties, Doug. I have preparation, data, and calculated risks. That's all any of us have. The shift from active operations to sustained confinement changed the group's psychology immediately. Without the daily purpose of supply runs, time became elastic and oppressive. The adults had assignments: maintenance, monitoring, rationing, education for the children. But the sense of forward momentum evaporated. I felt it most acutely. My role as the outside man was the only identity I'd built in this new world. Without it, I reverted to the useless feeling of the first morning. Standing in my own house watching competent people do competent things while I searched for relevance. Claire noticed. Of course she noticed. "I need you on threat monitoring," she told me on day 20. "Full partnership with Ethan. You have observation experience now. You know their patterns, their movements. Build predictive models. When can we go outside again? Under what density threshold? Give me data I can plan around." She was giving me purpose, constructing my relevance deliberately. I recognized the management technique and didn't care. It worked. It gave me something to do besides marinate in the claustrophobia of 11 people in a 4-bedroom house. Ethan and I built a system. We mapped infected movements hourly, plotted density curves, identified patterns in their clustering behavior. My son and I, working side by side with binoculars and notebooks, speaking in whispered shorthand about creatures that had been our neighbors. It was horrible, and it was bonding. And it was the closest I'd felt to Ethan since he was small enough to sit on my shoulders. "Dad," he said on day 21, during a quiet shift at the observation post, "did you really not believe Mom about any of this?" The question landed like a stone in still water. "I believed her about some things," I said carefully. "But not the big thing. Not that it would actually happen. No, not that." He was quiet for a minute, recording a movement in his ledger. "I believed her. She showed me the data. She explained how fragile everything was. Supply chains, power grids, pandemic preparedness. She never said it would definitely happen. She said it could. And she asked if I wanted to learn how to survive if it did." "And you said yes?" "Yeah." He lowered the binoculars. "I think I said yes, because she was the only person who treated me like I was smart enough to handle it." That sentence opened one of my closed doors, the one behind which I'd stored all the ways I'd failed, not just Claire, but Ethan. All the times I'd chosen the comfortable dismissal over the uncomfortable engagement. All the years I'd been physically present and intellectually absent. "She was right to trust you," I said. "You've been, Ethan, you've been incredible through this." He shrugged with teenage deflection, but I saw the straightening of his spine, the small, proud lift of his chin. Outside, the infected walked their endless circuits. Inside, my son and I watched and counted and planned, building something together in the wreckage. Day 24. I woke to voices. Not the quiet, functional murmur of our household, raised voices, urgent, coming from downstairs. I descended to find Claire in the kitchen facing Doug, Danny between them with his hands raised in a calming gesture that wasn't working. Monica stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. Sarah was nowhere visible. "What's happening?" I said. Doug pointed at Claire. "She's been lying to us about the food." Claire's face was controlled, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "I haven't lied. I've adjusted projections based on new calculations." "Adjusted," Doug spat. "She just told us we have 6 weeks of food instead of 10. 4 weeks disappeared overnight, and she expects us to just accept that." "The projections changed because conditions changed," Claire said. 2 of the rain collection barrels were compromised by the windstorm on Tuesday. Reduced water means reduced ability to prepare certain foods. Several sealed items in storage showed signs of compromise during yesterday's inspection. Bloated cans that could mean botulism. I removed them. This reduced our total supply. And you didn't tell us when it happened. You waited until now. I verified the numbers before creating panic. Creating panic! Doug stepped forward. Danny's hand touched his chest. You're rationing our children's food based on secret calculations you keep in a book none of us are allowed to see. Anyone can see the journal, Claire said. It's been on the table since day one. No one's asked to read it. Doug faltered at this, but only for a moment. That's not the point. The point is, you make decisions unilaterally. You decide what we eat, when we sleep, who does what, who goes outside, who stays in. You've been controlling everything since day one, and now your projections are failing, and you're asking us to trust you anyway. The room was silent. I watched Doug's words land on Danny and Monica. I watched them consider. Not agreeing, not yet, but considering. The seed of doubt, once planted, doesn't need water in a crisis. It grows on fear. Doug, I said, Claire's projections haven't failed. She said 10 weeks under stable conditions. Conditions changed. That's not failure, that's reality. And reality is that your wife decides whether my kids eat. That doesn't sit right with me, Marcus. It shouldn't sit right with you either. Something shifted in that moment. It wasn't that Doug was wrong about the structural problem. One person holding unchecked authority is a legitimate concern in any community. It was that his concern wasn't principled. It was personal. He didn't want distributed power. He wanted his power. He wanted to return to the world where his voice was loudest and his presence largest, and women who prepared were punchlines. Here's what I'll offer, Claire said, her voice deliberately even. Weekly council meetings where I present all data openly. Full transparency on calculations. Group vote on major decisions. But operational authority in emergencies stays with me because emergency decisions can't wait for consensus. Danny nodded immediately. That's fair. Monica looked at Doug. Doug, that's fair. Doug worked his jaw. He wanted to refuse. I could see it. But 4 people were watching him, and the offer was reasonable, and refusing a reasonable offer would expose him as something other than a concerned father. Fine, he said. Weekly meetings, full transparency, starting now. Starting tonight, Claire said. I need time to prepare the full data presentation. Doug left the kitchen. Monica followed again, whispering something to him in the hallway that I couldn't hear but could read in her body language as reproach. When they were gone, Claire exhaled slowly. It was the first time I'd seen her composure slip since this began. Not a collapse, just a visible exhale that admitted to strain. He won't stop, she said quietly. This isn't about food or transparency. This is about him not being able to stand a woman running things. I wanted to disagree. I couldn't. I'll watch him, I said. You keep saying that. She looked at me. Start actually doing it. I watched, through days 25, 26, 27. I watched Doug's movements through the house, his conversations, his interactions. He was careful, never openly confrontational after the kitchen incident. He complimented Claire's management at the weekly meeting. He worked his assignments without complaint. He told jokes at dinner that made the children laugh and lightened the crushing weight of confinement. But in the spaces between performance, he worked. A conversation with Danny in the garage, just 2 guys talking, nothing suspicious. But I noticed Danny's expression afterward was troubled in a way it hadn't been before. A moment with Sarah while she did inventory. Must be hard, all these numbers, just trusting Claire got them right. planting without pushing. A chat with Monica that I couldn't overhear, but that left his own wife looking conflicted. He was building something. Slowly. Not a coup. Nothing so dramatic. An erosion. A gradual weakening of the absolute trust that Claire's competence had earned. If enough people questioned just enough, the structure would develop cracks. And in a system where one person's judgment kept 11 people alive, cracks meant death. On day 28, I told Claire what I'd observed. She listened without expression, taking notes in her journal. "What do you want to do?" I asked. "What would you do?" The question surprised me. She'd never asked for my strategic input before. Confront him. Confrontation gives him a stage. He performs best with an audience. She tapped her pen against the page. "No, I give him responsibility. Real responsibility. Something that makes him invested in the system rather than opposed to it." "Like what?" "Security chief, interior defense. If someone breaches our perimeter, he's the response lead. It gives him authority, status, physical purpose. And it aligns his ego with our survival rather than against it. Will it work? Maybe, maybe not. But it buys time." She paused. "Marcus, there's something else. Something I haven't shared with the group yet." I waited. "I've been in contact with a settlement, 20 miles north. They have a larger group, 40-plus people, agricultural land, a doctor. They're consolidating survivors." "That's, Claire, that's incredible. Why haven't you?" "Because getting there requires crossing 20 miles of high-density infected territory with 3 children, a diabetic woman, and a man with a bad knee." She meant Doug. He'd aggravated an old injury during the first week. "I've been planning a route, but the density data you and Ethan are generating isn't encouraging. The corridor between here and there has the highest concentration we've mapped. So we're stuck. We're stuck unless conditions change, which they might. The decay predictions suggest infected in the outlying areas are beginning to break down. If we wait 4 to 6 more weeks, the corridor may open." "We have 6 weeks of food." "Exactly. The margin is razor thin. We arrive at the settlement just as our supplies exhaust, or we die on the road before we get there, or we die here having waited too long." She closed the journal. "That's what I'm calculating. That's what keeps me awake at night. And that's why Doug's campaign to undermine trust is so dangerous. Because when I tell this group we need to march 20 miles through a wasteland, I need them to follow me without hesitation." I understood then, fully, completely, the weight she carried. Not just the logistics of survival, but the human engineering. Managing fear, ego, trust, morale. Keeping 11 people alive required keeping 11 people unified. And one man's wounded pride threatened that unity. "I'll handle Doug," I said. "How?" "I'll tell him about the settlement. Give him something to be part of. Make him feel like he's in on the real plan." Claire considered this. It's a risk. If he reacts badly, then we'll know where he stands. Better to know now than when we're on the road. She nodded slowly. "Tomorrow, then. Brief him tomorrow." I agreed. I went to bed that night carrying the knowledge of our escape route like a coal in my chest, burning and essential. I briefed Doug the next morning in the garage, privately. I told him about the settlement, the corridor problem, the timing constraint. I framed it as Claire wanting his input on the security dimensions of a 20-mile transit. He listened. I watched his face move through surprise, then calculation, then something that concerned me. A flicker of opportunity assessment, like a man spotting a gap in a defense. 20 miles, he said, with 3 kids and Sarah barely mobile. Claire's working on the route, but she needs someone thinking about perimeter defense during transit, formations, emergency protocols. That's your area now. My area. He scratched his jaw. She want me to plan it. She wants you involved in planning it. Your military background. National Guard, 20 years ago. More than any of us have. He nodded slowly. I could see him weighing 2 paths, cooperation versus exploitation. To his credit, or perhaps to my surprise, he chose something in between. I'll work on formations, he said. But Marcus, I want to say something to you, man to man. Go ahead. Claire is smart. Smartest person I know, probably. But smart people have blind spots. They think they can control everything because they've planned for everything. And when something happens that isn't in the plan, that's when controlled people panic worse than anyone. She hasn't panicked yet. The world hasn't thrown anything at her she didn't predict yet. What happens when it does? I didn't have an answer. He clapped me on the shoulder and went upstairs to the observation post. I stood in the garage smelling bleach and motor oil, wondering if Doug Pasternak, a man I'd never taken seriously for any reason beyond his loudness, had identified a truth I'd missed. Day 30. The corridor density data showed a shift. Ethan detected a 9% decrease in infected presence along the northern route compared to peak measurements. The decay was happening. Slowly, inconsistently, but the trend line pointed in the right direction. Claire updated her timeline. 3 more weeks minimum. We need at least a 40% reduction before I'll sanction transit. 3 more weeks. Food supplies would be critical by then. Less than a week's margin between departure and starvation. That night, something happened that nobody planned for. At 2:17 a.m., a sound penetrated the house that none of us had heard before. A vehicle engine. Close, getting closer. Then the squeal of brakes and the unmistakable crash of a car hitting something solid. Everyone was awake within seconds. I was at the observation post in 45 seconds, binoculars up. A pickup truck had crashed into the Whitfield mailbox across the street, headlights blazing into the darkness, engine still running. The driver's door opened, and a man fell out. Alive, uninfected, bleeding from his forehead. And the noise. God, the noise. The engine growling, the radio inside the cab, playing music at volume, the man groaning on the pavement. It was like a dinner bell rung across the neighborhood. Claire, I said into the 2-way, we have an uninfected survivor in the street. And he just rang the alarm for every infected in a half-mile radius. Her response was immediate. How many inbound? Ethan, beside me, was already counting. 8 from the east. 6, no, 9 from the west. More coming. They're converging on the truck. The driver, conscious, trying to stand. Silence on the radio. 3 seconds. Then Claire's voice. We don't open the perimeter. We don't go out. I'm sorry. I watched through binoculars as the man in the street raised his head and looked directly at our house. He couldn't see us behind the boards, but he saw a house. Intact. Fortified. He started crawling toward us. The infected were 40 seconds away. Claire. Marcus, we don't open the perimeter. Doug's voice came from behind me. Screw that. That's a living person. What happened next took 11 seconds. Doug pushed past me and was down the stairs before I could grab him. I heard his footsteps through the house. Heavy, fast, the footsteps of a man who'd found his stage. The back door deadbolt turned. The door opened. Cold air rushed in. Claire intercepted him at the door. I heard her voice, sharp for the first time since this began. "Doug, no!" Then his voice, "I'm not watching a man die while we hide." Then the door slam. Then silence inside, though through the observation window I could see Doug rounding the house toward the street, crowbar in hand, moving toward the crawling man. The infected were 20 seconds out. Doug reached the driver, grabbed his arm, hauled him upright. The man screamed in pain. A broken leg, I'd realize later. And that scream carried through the night like a flare. The infected arrived. Claire's voice on the two-way, controlled but urgent. "Marcus, the back door is open. Seal it when they're in. If they're not back in 30 seconds, seal it anyway." I was already moving. Down the stairs, through the house, to the back door where Claire stood with her hand on the frame, body tense, watching the corner of the house where Doug had disappeared. Sounds from the front. Wet, violent sounds. Doug shouting, the stranger screaming. Then footsteps. Doug appeared around the corner, dragging the man by his jacket collar. Behind them, shapes in the darkness. That stuttering, awful movement. Close. So close. Doug shoved the stranger through the door, fell in after him. I slammed it shut, and Claire threw the deadbolt, and then the crossbar, and then the secondary brace that Doug himself had installed 2 weeks ago. Something hit the door from outside, then again. Then the sounds of multiple bodies pressing against our exterior wall. Fingernails, or what remained of fingernails, scraping against wood. The stranger lay on our floor bleeding, conscious, wild-eyed. Doug stood over him, breathing hard, crowbar slick with something dark. His face was alive in a way I hadn't seen since this started. Electric, righteous, vindicated. "Everyone shut up," Claire said. "No sound, no movement. They'll lose interest if there's no continuing stimulus." We froze, all of us. The scraping continued for 7 minutes. Then gradually, it faded. The bodies moved away, drawn by some other stimulus. A bird, the wind, the still running truck engine in the street. Claire looked at Doug. Her face was a mask I couldn't read. "You compromised our perimeter," she said. "I saved a man's life. You risked 11 lives for one. I made a call, a human call." They stared at each other across the bleeding stranger, and I realized this was the fracture I'd been watching build for weeks, not about food or authority or ego, about the fundamental question of survival. What was it worth if you lost the thing that made it meaningful? Claire had built a perfect machine for staying alive. Doug had just proven that staying alive and staying human might require different architectures. The stranger's name was Ray Callahan. He was a paramedic. He'd been driving north from the military perimeter, which had collapsed 6 hours ago, not weeks from now as Claire had estimated, trying to reach the same settlement Claire had learned about on the ham radio. "The perimeter's gone?" Claire said. Her voice was steady, but I saw her hand tighten on her pen. "Overrun at 8 p.m., Ray said through gritted teeth. They came in waves. Nothing held. Everyone scattered. Claire's calculation, 3 weeks until corridor viability, evaporated. The collapse of the perimeter meant a new influx of infected migrating outward from the metro core. Our neighborhood wouldn't see decreased density. It would see dramatically increased density within days. "We have to go," Claire said. "Now. Not 3 weeks. Now." Doug was right about one thing. When something happened that wasn't in the plan, I watched my wife recalculate faster than anyone else in the room. Not panic, adaptation. But I saw the flash of fear in her eyes, before she buried it. Something unpredicted had finally arrived, and we were running out of time to respond. Claire had us packed in 4 hours. The precision was breathtaking. She'd pre-staged evacuation supplies in modular packs, each labeled by carrier and optimized for weight-to-necessity ratio. Every adult received a pack. Ethan carried a smaller one. The Pasternak children carried nothing. They needed their energy for walking. Ray's broken leg was a problem. Danny and Doug fashioned a splint from shelf boards and medical tape, and Ray insisted he could move with a makeshift crutch. He'd be slow. He'd be vulnerable. But he had knowledge of the route north. He'd driven half of it, and he knew the settlement's entry protocols. "We move at first light," Claire announced. "Pre-dawn. Lowest activity window based on all available data. Formation. Danny leads with Marcus. Ethan and I center with children and Sarah. Doug and Ray rear. Total distance 20 miles. Estimated travel time 14 hours with breaks." 14 hours with 3 kids and a man with a broken leg? Doug said. But not combatively. Something had shifted between them since the door incident. Not resolution, recognition maybe. That they were both right about different things, and neither had the complete picture. "We'll adjust as needed," Claire said. "But we leave regardless. In 48 hours, this house won't be survivable." I spent the remaining night hours doing something I never expected: writing. In the margins of Ethan's observation ledger, I wrote down what had happened. Not all of it, just the essential things. How Claire prepared, how everyone laughed, how the laughter stopped. I wrote it because I realized we might not all make it north. Someone should know what she did, what she was. At 4:45 a.m., we assembled in the garage. 11 people and 1 man with a broken leg on a makeshift crutch. Claire ran final checks. Packs sealed, radios charged, medical kit distributed across multiple carriers in case of separation. She'd thought of separation. She'd thought of everything. She looked at each of us in turn. Not a speech. Claire wasn't a speech person. Just a look. Acknowledgement, assessment, confirmation. Stay together. Stay quiet. Follow the person ahead of you. If we encounter infected, we don't engage. We reroute. If someone falls behind, we slow down. We don't leave anyone. Doug met her eyes at that last statement. Something passed between them that I couldn't fully interpret. An agreement, maybe. A truce in their war of philosophies. Her cold mathematics and his hot humanity finding a temporary synthesis. I opened the garage bay door manually. No power to the motor. The street was gray, pre-dawn, silent. Ethan's final observation check showed clear sight lines in all directions. The infected from last night's truck incident had dispersed. We moved. 11 people and 1 injured stranger walking up Maple Court for the last time. Past the Henderson house where I'd faced Mrs. Henderson in her kitchen. Past the Whitfield house with its open door. Past Doug's house where his children had hidden while their father called my wife names. The world was still there. The houses, the trees, the sidewalks. But it was backdrop now. Scenery in an abandoned theater. The play was over. Only the actors remained, wandering backstage, looking for an exit. Claire walked beside me at the center of our formation. Her binder was in her pack. The whole thing, all 7 sections, every laminated page. I'd asked why she was bringing it. "Because I might be wrong about something," she said. "And when I am, I want to know which assumption failed." Even now. Even walking into the unknown, with everything familiar behind us, and nothing certain ahead. She was still gathering data, still iterating, still preparing for the next version of the problem. I took her hand. She let me hold it for 4 blocks before gently withdrawing. She needed both hands free to manage the radio. Practical as always. Loved as always. Though I'd been too proud to say it properly for too many years. We turned north, toward the settlement, toward whatever came next. The journey north took 19 hours, not 14. Claire's estimate couldn't have accounted for what we encountered. The infected density wasn't uniformly distributed, but clustered in unpredictable pockets around landmarks. An elementary school drew them by the dozens. A grocery store parking lot held a mass so thick we could hear their collective breathing from 2 blocks away. A sound like industrial bellows. Claire rerouted us 7 times. Each detour cost distance and daylight. By noon, the children were struggling. Lily Pasternak sat down on a curb at the 11-mile mark and said, "I can't," in a small voice that cut through every adult's composure. Doug picked her up, put her on his shoulders, kept walking. His bad knee must have been screaming, but his face showed nothing. Say what you want about Doug Pasternak, and I've said plenty, but that man carried his 8-year-old daughter on damaged legs for 9 miles without complaint. Sarah collapsed at mile 14. Her blood sugar plummeted despite the glucose tablets Claire administered on schedule. Danny carried her on his back for 2 miles before his own strength failed. Then Doug took over, now carrying 2 people in alternating shifts. Lily on his shoulders, Sarah on his back. The man was a machine when it mattered. A loud, frustrating, occasionally dangerous machine. But a machine that wouldn't quit. We lost the road at mile 17. A bridge collapse, recent possibly military demolition, forced us into a wooded area beside a creek. The terrain was harder, but the tree cover reduced our visibility to infected, and Claire noted that the density dropped dramatically away from road infrastructure. Ray, on his crutch, kept pace through what must have been extraordinary pain. He guided us through the final 3 miles, using landmarks he recognized from his drive. A water tower, a red barn with a collapsed roof, a billboard advertising a restaurant that would never serve another meal. At 11:47 p.m., 19 hours after leaving Maple Court, we saw lights. Real lights. Electric lights powered by generators, illuminating a perimeter fence made of vehicles, construction barriers, and corrugated metal. Armed figures stood on elevated platforms. Living people, organized people. Claire keyed the radio frequency Ray had given her. Settlement North. This is Claire Dunhill. Party of 12 approaching from the south. We're unarmed. We have children. A pause. Then, copy, Dunhill Party. Approach the main gate slowly, hands visible. Welcome to North Haven. The children began crying, not from fear, from relief. The sound of adult strangers welcoming them. They broke something open in those small bodies that weeks of composure had been holding shut. Even Jake, 13 and performing stoicism for weeks, let tears run down his face without wiping them. Monica was sobbing. Danny was gripping Sarah's hand, murmuring into her hair. Doug stood still with Lily still on his shoulders, looking at the lights like a man seeing land after months at sea. Claire stood beside me, motionless, watching. Her face in the distant electric glow was exhausted, lined, beautiful. She didn't cry. She did something worse. She trembled. A single, visible shudder ran through her frame, the accumulated tension of weeks finally finding a crack in her control. I put my arms around her. She let me. For 30 seconds, she let me hold her weight completely, her forehead against my chest, her body shaking with the force of everything she'd carried. "You did it," I said. "We're not inside yet," she murmured. "Practical to the end." "Claire?" You did it. You saved 11 people, 12 with Ray. She pulled back, wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand, one quick, efficient gesture. Straightened her shoulders, adjusted her pack. "Let's go," she said. "We can rest when we're through the gate." We walked the final 100 yards to North Haven together. 12 people who had been neighbors, then refugees, then a community forged in the architecture one woman built while the world laughed. The gate opened. Warm light spilled out. Voices welcomed us. Hands reached to help the children, to support Sarah, to stabilize Ray. We were through. We were safe. And every person who crossed that threshold owed their life to the woman they'd called Doomsday Diane. It's been 4 months since we arrived at North Haven. I work agriculture now. My hands have calluses I never imagined a sales manager could develop. Ethan teaches younger children the observation skills his mother gave him. Danny runs the settlement's electrical grid. Doug leads a perimeter security team and does it well, though he and Claire still argue at community meetings with a ferocity that somehow builds rather than destroys. Claire sits on the settlement council. She brought her binder. She's already written 3 new sections. I think about Maple Court sometimes, about the laughter that carried across backyard fences while my wife quietly assembled the machinery of our salvation, about the years I lost to dismissal, and the minutes that nearly cost us everything. I don't laugh at her anymore, not the quiet, dismissive kind. I laugh with her sometimes, genuinely, gratefully, in the dark of our shared room, when the generators hum and the perimeter lights hold the night at bay. She saved us, all of us, not because she was afraid of the end, but because she loved us enough to prepare for it while we were too comfortable to believe it could come. It came. She was ready. That's the whole story.